I have a little treat for you.
What?
I went out and picked these, and I don't know. Yes, there, you can see them.
Oh,
Our gardenias are in bloom. Do
I
you
bet.
remember prom night when getting a gardenia was like the best thing ever?
And on your wrist, or did you put them on your dress or on your shoulder?
I
It
can't
was
remember, but I have to say that the smell is totally seductive. So it's
The
going to sit
fragrance is
here.
amazing of gardenias. We just had a raft of tulips that were, I ordered them too late, and so I usually just get all white. And this year the white ones were gone, so I thought, well, I'll just get anything. I'll just give me any of those tulips. And we just had this fabulous array of color. It was really glorious. And it was, of course, bizarrely cold in Boston, so they did really well. They don't like it when it's too hot. So the flowers in the garden, those kinds of things are really restorative. Although you want to say to them, don't you know? Don't, well, how can you be so normal? So
I think it was Mother Nature's gift to us during all this. We've had an extraordinary spring here. The saguaro are just putting out their amazing blossoms that form circles at the end of the arms of the saguaro. So they look kind of like those Swedish crowns they wear, for midsummer. And the
no, I've seen
gardenias,
pictures of those.
sorry?
I've seen pictures of those, and it's quite amazing.
It is.
Reed Farrell Coleman and his wife Roseanne. Gosh, maybe 7 years ago, they stayed with us, and Roseanne gave us a African violet in sort of in a fishbowl, almost like a terrarium. And it has not only survived through my benign neglect, but completely thrived. And it is just gloriously blooming with these African violet flowers. This is years and years and years later. And it just is so encouraging and reassuring, that something can work. Although, I don't know, who knows?
Well, Rob brought home an orchid. I am death to orchids, but he's going to try a series of benign neglect plants and
Yes.
see if that will work.
Well, someone told me that the way to do orchids is pick a day of the week and then give them 6 ice cubes. Just put 6 ice cubes in the dirt, and the ice melts gradually, and that gives them as much water as they need. And then you can just forget about it for the week. And then the next week, give them 6 more ice cubes. So
Yes.
that seems pretty cool.
Rob said that is true. I think the difference is then he will program his phone to alert him to ice cubes, whereas I don't do tech well, so I would forget. Anyway, let's move on and talk a bit about what it's like to be writing in this time. But first, I found, look what I have here.
Oh, I love that. That's fantastic.
So
I'm so pleased with it and so thrilled with that. It's beautiful, isn't it? I mean, I will match your cover. It's beautiful, and I'm so happy. I gasped when I saw it. It was just great.
well, this is your August 4th release, but Hank just got a wonderful starred review in Publishers Weekly, so I'll just read you a little excerpt. We're going to come back and talk to Hank during her publication week, so we don't want to go into it too much at the moment, but I like a teaser. So this says, in this stellar standalone from...
Wait. What was that word? In this what?
Sorry, in this stellar...
Stellar. You can just stop right there. It's all fine. I have to just tell you, and I don't mean to interrupt you, Barbara, reading my Publishers Weekly starred review, but when I saw that word, I was by myself, and I just started applauding. And I think any author and any reader would know what a treat it is, and how coveted and how rare it is to get a starred review. So don't let me interrupt you from reading this whole glorious thing.
I'll carry on. Okay. Broadcast journalist is it L or Ellie?
It's Ellie.
Ellie Berenson relishes her first assignment for Boston's startup Channel 11, proving that a much touted drug made by the pharmaceutical company Pharmanex can make women barren. Now I'm going to stop right there, but I do think that anything that is being written right now, when obviously we're all deeply interested in pharmaceutical companies and what miracles they can perform, hopefully sooner rather than later. You wrote this book a long time ago, because that's the way books go. They are not journalism written to the moment. But it's interesting that your topic is so completely key to where we are in this pandemic.
Well, I agree with you. I mean, it's interesting about sort of the author zeitgeist. My books are all sort of contemporary, timely, newsworthy, investigative cat and mouse games. And the first to lie is also. And, two fast things, three fast things. One is, you talked to Scott Turow the other night in a fabulous interview, and the same kind of thing. And his new book is also about the machinations of a pharmaceutical company that may or may not be doing something good. And I think it's all sort of top of mind now. How much power those companies can have, and how much responsibility those companies can have, and how much humans, we rely on what they're offering us, and we rely on them to not only tell us the truth, but to know the truth, and that balance between the harm that could possibly happen versus the good that can be done is endlessly fascinating. And I tried to tap into that in The First to Lie, and I know Scott tapped into that in his new book. And hilariously, talking about writer's zeitgeist, I was having dinner, maybe 6 months ago, back when we could still go out to dinner, with Joe Finder. And I said to him, what's your upcoming book about? And he said, what's your upcoming book about? And I said, you tell me first. And he says, because his book was coming out first. And he said, well, it's about sort of a daughter of a pharmaceutical company who knows some secrets about her family's company and goes out to sort of reveal them. So then he says, what's your book about? And I said, well, it's about the daughter of a pharmaceutical company who knows some secrets about her parents' company and is working to reveal them. So we just looked at each other over wood-fired pizza and started laughing, because that a Joe Finder book is going to be different from a Hank Phillippi Ryan book. They're just going to be different. But of course I was terrified. So the minute Joe's House on Fire came out, I ran to get it and devoured it. And I'm telling you that the log lines for each of our books are completely the same, and the books could not be more different. So it's really a fascinating thing to think about, how writers' minds work, given exactly the same topic, and coming out with exactly a different book.
I think you're certainly right that your book and Joe Finder's book and Scott Turow book will all be totally different. But in a broader conversation about thrillers, because I was thinking about that today, every thriller needs an antagonist. Every thriller needs a protagonist, a hero. And basically, thrillers are journeys or quests or, battles, whatever you want to call them, that move across a spectrum. So you need an antagonist. And I think at the moment, we are really done with deep state and evil government and corrupt senators and, corrupt presidents and all the rest, having moved on from military thrillers where we've had an awful lot of time with evil Middle Eastern villains, and probably now a resumption of Chinese are going to come back. So it seems kind of inevitable that people writing thrillers are going to be looking for new antagonists, and the pharmaceutical companies kind of all popped up. So I think it's part of what's going on in the world, but I think it's also part about what it is to write a thriller.
Well, I think you put your finger on it, because the key of a good antagonist, though, is that they can't be a cardboardy character, right? So there has to be an entity that is smart, that is doing what it thinks is the right thing. It has to have a passion, and it has to have a purpose, and it has to have high stakes. It has to be something it has to be an entity, a person that you care about and that matters to an individual's life. Something that's understandable and relatable and an integral part of their lives, like medicine is. And there's so much money and so much power and so much possibility of cutting corners. And you have this calculus of, well, if 10 people are hurt and 1 million people are saved, what do you do in that kind of situation? You know, if one person's life is made absolutely miserable forever and somebody else's, 10,000 other people's lives are happier than they've ever been, how do we rely on the people that hold the reins to that power to make a decision like that? And that's very difficult. And that's what makes in pharmaceutical companies, and I say this in the most general way, have done astonishing, life-changing, brilliant, wonderful, magical, scientific magic things for all of us. And we absolutely rely on them. But as a result of that, there's a lot of money, and there's a potential greed, and there's potential cost cutting, corner cutting. And how do we, as an individual little tiny human being who may rely on that little pill or that little shot, how do we deal with a decision-making process that we might not even know what really is really underneath it? So that makes a good antagonist. Every good thriller is about a decision that gets made and what the results of that decision are, and then what happens after that. And the higher the stakes of that decision, the more interesting that book is going to be. And that's perfect for a pharmaceutical company, because it's not black and white.
Well, I agree with you. You've actually put your finger on, the crux of the ethical dilemma in Scott Turow's book, certainly. I think you're right that the stakes have to be high, but at the same time, relatability has a lot to do with it. We do a lot, and I really enjoy hosting a lot of military thrillers and military thriller authors. I've been lucky enough this year already to have Mark Graney here and Jack Carr here, and I have a new manuscript from Stephen Hunter just to look at for fun and all. And I love those, but I'm not a gun guy. I'm not a warrior, and I can't really put myself in the position of the heroes of those books. But in The Last Trial by Scott, or in your thrillers, it's more human. As you say, they affect everyday life. My husband, for example, is a diabetic, so he depends on insulin every day. And if that supply line is disrupted because we outsourced it to be made in Taiwan or something, he could die. That would be awful. I'm a child of the 1940s and 50s, and I remember polio. I remember not being allowed, in fact, Hank, to go to Boston on a trip and go to because of the risk of polio exposure in the summer. And then Dr. Salk came along, and the Salk vaccine knocked polio really out of our everyday consciousness. So we're not there yet with this virus, and we may not be there for a long time. But when there is, if there is, a safe, reliable vaccine, and if enough crazy people don't refuse to take it, and then I don't know what we do about them. I think the anti-vaxxers are a huge problem when we come to something like this. It may be that we will all look back on this as a short time, of COVID, as I look back on polio now as a remote event. But the problem is we're living through it right now, and we don't know what the outcome is. So reading books like yours that are, I don't want to say peripheral, but engaged in this world, but not of COVID itself, gives us some hope that, maybe it will all work out for us. And then we have the lockdown dilemma too. It's the same thing. How do we balance safety versus economic devastation and emotional devastation? I have to make that decision with the help of my staff or with their input for the store next week. I think that we reopen for curbside service, and that's limiting, but do we want to let people into the store? I have an author who wants to come live in July, and she will probably be our very first live event in some time. And I said to her, there may only be like 10 people wearing masks, but at least she and I can have a live conversation as compared to this. And if she's willing to travel, then great.
Well, and I think that one of the things that we always talk about in this calculus is how much we don't have all the puzzle pieces. Going back a tiny bit to the first to lie, if you know something and you are and you want to tell it for the betterment of society and for the betterment of the big picture and for the betterment of your life as well. Which is what happens in this book. That's a little bit different from all of us trying to plan what to do in July. And I think that's one of the things that's so frustrating for all of us who are trying to control our lives a little bit, is there are so many puzzle pieces in this puzzle and we don't have them all. So how can we decide what will be okay in July? I mean, I say to my husband every day, step by step, day by day, really hour by hour, we can figure out what to do. But if we let our minds just race ahead, and we're all imaginative, we all live in literature and books and talking about ideas. If we let our writer minds race ahead to what might happen in real life, I thought it's terrifying and it's impossible. So I am trying to live my life a little bit, sort of like I write, sort of word by word, page by page. See what happens, make decisions along the way, because whatever we decide right now, it doesn't really matter in the long run, unless the only thing we can do right now is stay safe, try to stay, with some equilibrium, try to keep as much as we can to our ordinary, normal, regular lives, which we miss so much. I set the washing machine setting to normal, and I almost burst into tears because I thought, I wish I could do that with our lives. I wish I could turn a little, some sort of button to have it be back to normal, but we can't do that. So also, we're so lucky to, I think about this every day. We're so lucky. I'm a writer. My husband's a lawyer. You have a bookstore. There's a thing that you can still do. We can still do these things and still stay as safe as we can. But so many people can't do that, so it's a really frightening process to think about what's going on out there and what's going on in here, and the decisions that each of us make, you especially, for instance, in this particular milieu, in this particular little corner of the world, whether to let 10 people into your store. When, 6 months ago, you'd be getting hundreds of people in your store, and happily so. People sitting in those fold-up chairs and helping you take them down with their arms around each other and hugging people you don't even know. And now you think, oh, I don't know, you want to come to the curb and Patrick will leave a bag for you and then go inside and then you pick it up. Maybe, but you won't know. You won't know till the time comes.
Well, you're absolutely right. I'm trying to deal with this 2 weeks at a time. I used to write month-long newsletters, and now I'm writing really short ones because anything I write is likely to be out of date by the time even I post it. What we miss, Hank, is there are opportunities actually doing this to talk to authors that we might not normally see. For example, I got a request today to host Mark Bowden, who I think is amazing, who doesn't normally go places. David Baldacci and I are going to be talking on the 27th of May for a Father's Day thing. So Ian Rankin and I had a lovely conversation earlier this week. So there have been some pluses, but what you miss, Hank, you really miss the human connection, the energy in the room. As you say, the camaraderie. Bookstores have become kind of like community centers in a lot of places as other services in the social network has faltered. Bookstores have become, in many ways, a safe gathering place. And it's not the same.
It's not the same. No, it's not the same. And you encourage that, to have the Poisoned Pen be a place where people can come and chat, and your staff are so knowledgeable, and you're so knowledgeable, and Rob's so knowledgeable, and everybody loves the same thing, and we're searching for the same thing, this book, that we love. I've been involved in a new project with the author Hannah Mary McKinnon. Do you know her? Her new book is called Sister Dear. We should introduce you if you don't know her. She's fabulous. Her new book, Sister Dear, comes out in a couple weeks. Anyway, it's a thriller. It's a domestic suspense. It fooled the heck out of me. I gasped at the end. Anyway, she and I have a project on Facebook and Instagram called First Chapter Fun, where every Tuesday and Thursday at 11:30 Eastern, one of us reads out loud on Instagram on First Chapter Fun and on Facebook on First Chapter Fun Live. We read the first chapter of a new book. with the publisher's permission and with the author's permission. And hundreds of people come just to hear that first chapter. It's like a little story time. Everybody is invited, everybody comes, people are inviting their friends. And that's our way of saying, these, we don't read our books, we read other people's books, new books. And this is our way of saying, here is something you might love, all genres, all types of books. Here's something you might love. And here's something you could go get at your independent bookstore, either online or by picking it up at curbside or by mail or however bookstores want to do it. But it's our sort of little bit for discoverability, to share other authors' books and read the whole first chapter, which is really nerve-wracking but so much fun, because we all have to work together in this. This is all of our livelihood. At the end of every live speech I give, I hold up my little book and say, in my book is for sale, no pressure, it's just my career. That is our career. And if there's anything that we can do to help others and bookstores, then that's what Hannah and I are trying to do.
That's a wonderful project. I'm glad you held up the murder list, because tell me about what's just happened with the murder list.
The Murder List just became a USA Today bestseller. And I'm just I can't even talk. You can hear this. I'm so happy about that. And so on the final cover of the first to lie, they just put USA Today bestselling author. And again, that's such a life moment, isn't it, when that happened? So I'm very happy about that. Thank you. You're a good pal to mention that.
It is a life moment, and I congratulate you. You've had incredible accolades. I know you've won 5 Agathas, and I can't remember how many other awards, and at least 36 Emmys. Do you remember when you and I'll leave the name of the author nameless, but when you and I introduced you to a multitude at the Poison Pen, and I mentioned that you had won at least 36 Emmys, and the nameless author then said, but nobody watches television anymore.
I have thought about that day from time to time. It was funny because I remember I said, I'm going to have to push back on that just a tiny little bit. But that was fun. The wonderful memory of that. And I do think people are watching TV like crazy now. All the wonderful things, all the wonderful fictional things that are on TV. Although I will admit that I have put my husband on news rationing now, because if I didn't go in and stop it, he'd just be watching the news all the time. And I kind of think we don't really need to fill our heads with this every minute of every day. But I do think television plays such an important role in, first of all, we're so lucky to have it. We're so lucky to have the internet and, all the, Zoom and all the access that we do to stay connected, all the noir at the bars and all the other events that are happening and book launches that you've been so pivotal in handling and bringing people together virtually to learn about new books and to hear from authors who you, as you were saying, you may not have heard from before. So yeah, that was a fun time.
I think if you try to look at this as opportunity, it's a more fruitful way to live day to day. I also think that staying disconnected is a really healthy thing to do. I limit myself to reading the paper in the morning. I'm really old-fashioned that way, but I like to sit down with coffee and read a real newspaper rather than doing all the digital stuff. And I've actually encouraged some of my staff who've been a bit anxious to disconnect, because if you just constantly are out there and it's all speculation, there's very little really hard truth that's available to us now. You can go crazy. So.
You think about, my husband was wary of turning off the news. He said, I really need to watch this. I really need to. And I said, there are no facts in here. And I say this in the kindest of ways. I'm a reporter and I rely on journalism, but this is just hours of people saying, well, what if this, and what if this, and what if this, and it's a little bit, it can be a little bit toxic. and I said to him, you know how you feel when you come out of a movie that was fabulous and fun and had a happy ending, a musical, if you watch Singing in the Rain, at the end of Singing in the Rain, you feel good. You're walking around singing. But if you watch a scary, sad movie, everything seems, the possibility of something bad around every corner. And it's your body, I don't mean to be woo about this, but your brain and your energy takes in that negativity and it just sits there and becomes more and more toxic. So the world is toxic enough without, that veneer of fear never leaves me. So why am I adding to it? I mean, I'm a reporter. I read 3 newspapers every morning, and just like you do. And it's not that I don't know things. And I watch the news at night for a bracketed amount of time. No question about it. I'm not saying, please don't tell me about this. I'm saying I have my limits. And I sort of recommend that.
Well, saturation leads to unease, and unease leads to, I think, even bad health habits. So I try not to do that. I'm interested in that people are asking for older books, some of which we can't supply. And Hank, I often think, because I'm a real devotee of the Regency period, having grown up on Jane Austen and Georgette Hare and really loving Regency romance, those books were written while England was in a 20-year war. And no one knew how it was going to come out until the very last day in June of 1815 at Waterloo. And yet, if you read Jane Austen, there's no real hint of the incredible unease that, had to have permeated society. Will the French come? Will our defenses hold? What's going to happen to our money and so forth? After the fact, when we know how it came out, we can deal with it. But while we're living through it, it's much harder. Now, I'd like to go back and talk about thrillers a bit. You watched the Scott Turow. Thank you very much, and I liked your questions. And I wondered what you thought of my theory I advanced that Presumed Innocent, which was hailed as a foundational legal thriller right after Anatomy of a Murder, let's say. But Presumed Innocent was really a pioneer in the whole idea of the unreliable narrator and trust no one.
Well, I thought it was, a couple things about it. First of all, I thought it was hilarious to watch Scott Turow try to process that question because, he's such a brilliant lawyer and such a brilliant writer, and I devour his books. But we all think of our books in a way that we think of them. And when somebody thinks of it in a different way, there's this sort of moment of like turning a battleship around, which sort of takes a while to think of your book in a different way. So the unreliable narrator, I always think all narrators are unreliable because they are telling us what they think and how they see a situation. And one of the things that a good author can do is recognize that the reader has an expectation that the main character of the book is reliable. We're on the train with that character. That character is telling us the story, and that story is true. So, yes, of course, in Presumed Innocent. I mean, I would love to have not read that book and go back and read it now to see if the end is as gaspingly surprising as it was at the time, and also how whether we would have, now that our brains are trained to more, to have that twist at the end. I mean, we're expecting it now, we're looking for it now, whether we would be looking for it in a different way. But the thing that Turow did in Presumed Innocent that was so seminal and was so cool, and was sort of the beginning, in a way, I mean, I'm thinking about this now, you think about Murder on the Orient Express. And there's an unreliable narrator for you, many unreliable narrators that Poirot has to take each of their different stories and figure out how they go together. And in the end, Agatha Christie gave us this jaw-dropping, gaspingly amazing answer that we should have seen that. We should have seen that coming. And it was fair. She gave us all the parts, she gave us all the clues, we just didn't see it. And I think Turow tapped into that as much as into the unreliable narrator of the equally seminal Gone Girl, is that it's because the reader sees what the author wants us to see. And when that turns out to be not it, that's not the unreliable narrator necessarily. That's just a smart author knowing who his readers are and luring, bringing them along the way on this trip, and all the while saying, ha, 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 ha. You don't know what's coming. I mean, in The First to Lie and in The Murder List, one of the things that people have said about them is that, and I call them this too, is that they're sort of Trojan horse books, that you think you're reading one thing and you're going along reading this as because you think you know the shape of what the book is going to be, and then at some point it isn't that at all. But I fooled you into reading it that way, and that's what Thoreau does. I don't mean to put us on the same plane. That's what Thoreau does so beautifully, also in that unreliability, as you say, of presumed innocent, is that we think we're reading something, and then that's not what we're reading. Defending Jacob does the same thing. It's the same, and I think that those are cousins. But I agree with you that Thoreau, in the legal thriller realm, started, well, except for The Murder of Roger Ackroyd too. That's the other one. But in legal thriller realm, for Thoreau, who certainly carved out that legal niche, that was the first of the books that were kind of like that, and that's why we remember that so beautifully. I mean, how long ago was that?
It was in 1987, as a matter of fact, because when I opened the store in 1989, the paperback had just come out. And as I pointed out to Scott, I can still remember customers lining up with it at the checkout counter and actually arguing over what happened in the book, who did it. And of course, the forensics were new then too. The deep science there was a relatively new thing. Yeah. But you're so right to go back to Agatha Christie and realize that Murder on the Orient Express, The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, really, and then there were none. And it even comes out in the ABC Murders, which was recently dramatized, and I didn't like it much, but nonetheless, she was a genius, really, at that Trojan horse kind of book, or certainly Roger Ackroyd, the ultimate unreliable narrator. And it's interesting to me because fans of genre fiction, every 20 years or so, there's kind of a whole new clan, of people who come into reading mystery and all, and many of them have never read some of the real basics, don't have any idea what we're talking about when we're talking about, unless they've seen the movie, and the movies can't do that to you.
No. I read I read Murder on the Orient Express I think I was 12. I mean, honestly, such a formative book. And, I've read it from time to time after that, and then saw the movie, and then I think saw another movie of it. And how many of them are there? Anyway, at some point before I started writing The Murder List, I read both of those books again. And Murder on the Orient Express in the book is begins differently. The whole sort of feeling of it is a little bit different. It's a fun thing to go back and read now. And she had such a way, I mean, you're right about the genius, they don't need us to say that, but she had such a way of bringing you into the story, and such a skill for authorly sleight of hand. She really did it. But do you have the Agatha Christie's in the store? Can you get them?
Oh no, they're all in print, and we carry them all the time. And it's interesting to me that I have just been careful not to do, I have to be careful not to say why The Murder of Roger Ackroyd is in fact a classic, because there are, to my amazement, so many people who have not read it. And I think you're right. I think for us, now that we have read it when we were young, because I certainly read them when we were young. In fact, anybody watching this should recommend Agatha Christie to all teenage readers, because it's wonderful to experience them when you are young. But now when we go back and look at them and we know how it came out, I think that we can appreciate the craft, the skill that she put into the structure of the story and how she told it, that we would never have been able to do reading it for the first time. I'm not a big fan of rereading books, but I think Christy is well worth it for an appreciation of how she did it that you can't see when you're a novice at reading her.
100%. And let me just say a couple things really fast. One is some of my favorite emails from readers are from people who write and say, I just read The Murder List for the second time to see how you did that. And that is the joy of my life, getting an email like that. The other thing, what was I just going to tell you? The other thing was, now it has gone completely out of my brain, but it was something about Agatha Christie. Well, we'll just come back to that because I've completely forgotten.
Well, we can do that. Now,
I know what it was. I know what it was.
Okay.
You were talking about going back and reading books for the second time. And I just did a TED Talk, a TEDx talk, which was just put up on the TED Talk platform. So I'm pretty amazed about that. So it has 57,000 views, which is kind of amazing. Anyway, I just did a TEDx talk on the title of which is Why I Read the Last Page of Books First. And I explain, I know. And then I say to people, don't do it to mine though. Don't read the last page of mine. Although you wouldn't know what happens if you read the last page. Anyway, my point in the TED Talk, in the TEDx talk, was exactly what you're saying, is that when I know the ending, I can go back and begin at the beginning and see how the author got there. So it's sort of research to see how you see all the things you missed. You see all the clues that were there. You see how the author did it. And it's really, for a writer, it's really educational and really instructive. And for a reader, it might be fun. You know, it's certainly fun to read my books again and see how I got to the ending, especially since I don't know the ending when I'm writing them. So it's a surprise for me to get there too.
Right, I can certainly see that. You also raise a really good point that how we read books relates to where we are in life. My reading is a lot different now that I'm an editor, and it's a lot different as a bookseller, when I am reading a book with the object of encouraging or discouraging, because I sometimes do. I want to love every book I open, but the truth is I don't. And part of my job as a bookseller, I think, is to recommend the books I think are more worthwhile to our customers, rather than just opening up a menu and saying, look, here's everything, and I love it all, which doesn't help anybody. As a bookseller, I think we have to make everything available for readers who want to self-select, but for those who would like some sort of guidance through, there are hundreds of books published every month. Nobody can take the time, let alone perhaps have the budget to do that. So that's part of our job. And I encourage the rest of our staff, because we all read differently, to write reviews and so forth to help out. But what you just said about the last page first, for you now as a writer, looking to see how it was done, that's a lot different than when you were 12 years old and opening up Murder on the Orient Express, and then you just wanted the reading experience.
Exactly. I know, and I thought what you were going to say is reading as an editor, because you're such a brilliant editor that you read a book and you think, oh, I wouldn't have done it that way. Oh, that ruined the pacing. Oh, I wonder why she put that in, or I wonder why he said that. Can you separate editor Barbara from just reader Barbara?
I try to. When I haven't edited the book, I try to just, let myself go into it. Don't take up a red pencil. Don't fume. Do you know where it really gets to me? And my husband's getting quite annoyed at me, because we really enjoy the long form stories on television. So many books. Ian Rankin and I talked about this the other day, how much he would like his Inspector Rebus to become long form television, because when they were television, whenever it was, probably 2 decades ago by now, they tried to do each book in an hour, which didn't work out.
That's impossible. No, that's impossible.
Right. So what I find myself doing as an editor is watching these, and I will say to Rob, it's so-and-so.
Oh.
He'll say, how do you know that? And I'll say, because there's no reason for this person to be in the story this long, unless unless they're, and I just wrote it. I'm not Stephen Hunter's editor, but when he sent me a manuscript, I wrote it back to him and I said, I knew it was so-and-so right then because there was no reason. I think it was Stephen, maybe it was somebody else. Anyway, there was no reason. No, it wasn't Stephen. I'm doing him a disservice. It was a book sent to me by an editor. Totally different. I'm sorry, Stephen. I didn't mean to slander you here. And I said I knew who it was on page 40 or something because there was no reason for this character to continue to be in the story if in fact it wasn't going to turn out to be the perp. And
you and I should watch TV together because Jonathan, who I think you probably saw just walk by, Jonathan and I will be watching the same kind of show together. And, within some seconds, I'll say, well, somebody's going to drown. And Jonathan says, why would you say that? And I said, because there's a river. Why would they show that river for 10 whole seconds if somebody's not going to drown in the river? That, of course. And then Jonathan will say, can't you just watch it? Can't you just have the fun of what? And I'm like, no, not really. I can't. I mean, it's my fun. It's fun for me. But he just lets the story wash over him, for which we as authors and booksellers and editors love that, because that means it's a show that pulls you in, not where people like us are saying, it's the sister. Oh, she's pregnant. And Jonathan will say, just stop, stop. Don't tell me it.
I find that takes over with me when it isn't very good storytelling, when it's weak. If it's a good story, I can set it all aside and just go with it and watch it. Where I tend to get into editorial mode is when the storytelling is not very good, and then I sort of want to just fix it. But anyway, let's wind this up by going back to the first to lie, because as I mentioned earlier, your publication week is August the 4th, and you are in a really nifty blog group with other authors, which include Reese Bowen and Jen McKinley, Deborah Crombie, Hallie Efron. I'm probably missing one or two.
Lucy Burdett.
So I was thinking, since we have this nifty technology, and if in fact we are not doing live events at that point, maybe we can get your whole group together, and that would be fun.
And then we can just see if we can all talk at the same time. That's what generally happens when we're all together. So the Zoom technology will at least keep 6 of us quiet while the seventh one talks. And we can do a book group for you. It doesn't have to be for me for my book, but we can do a book chat for you whenever you like. The Jungle Reds are your biggest fans. I mean, that's a high bar. But it would be fun to have all of us there talking about everything and nothing. Sure.
Well, the reason I brought it up is that you and Reese both have books due out in that first week in August, and Jen McKinley has a book due out the week before. So in fact, we could just do the 3 of you with brand new books if you wanted. And then, yes, I think it would be fun. We could do a whole Jungle Red book chat. Yeah. I like doing ones where, there's no new book or sales attached, but where we're just having a conversation and it's fun. So yeah, I would love to do that.
Great, sold. I mean, I was thinking what you were talking about when a show is good, just rewinding to that for 2 seconds. Reading in this time of the pandemic, that's what's happened to me as a reader now, is that I can't read a book that's not really, really good. My mind starts to wander. But when a book is incredibly well written and high quality, and then that's what brings me in, because I'm finding it's not as easy to read now as it was before, and a well-written book is what wins out.
Well, you're certainly right. I have been practicing book triage for some time, by which I mean I read the first 20 pages or so, and if I'm not loving it, I look up the end to see if there's anything that I, that will really like, and then I move on, because, there are 400 or 500 new books a month, and I can't embrace them all. I do try to look at them all. Our rule is if we're going to be talking to an author, either for a book event or a book chat or something, then we do read the whole book. Otherwise, you can't really have an intelligent conversation. I mean, you only have to watch, an author popping in on a morning TV show where it's perfectly clear that the interviewer's gotten 3 questions on a prompt, and that's all there is. But the rest of the time, everybody reads for different things. And I often say, I read for voice. If I am bored by the narrative voice, then what happens in the book just really doesn't grab me. And other people read for other things. Plot is actually the thing I read least for. Although when it's really terrible, it can get in the way. But it's more like going to a party, and you spend time with people that are interesting, and you kind of ignore the people that you find boring, and we're all different that way.
Although my husband says he feels like he's made a deal with the author that he's going to read the whole book no matter what happens. And from time to time I'll say, "How's your book, sweetheart?" And he'll say, "I don't know. And I said, "Well, what happened in it?" And he's like, "I don't know really." And so I said, "Well, why are you reading it then? Just stop reading it. Read something that you love." And he says, "No, I started it. I have to finish it." So I will tell you that I just take them. I hide them. And he'll say, "Where's my book?" And I say, "I don't know. It went away. Here's another one for you. Why don't you try this?" So that's a technique that you feel free to use.
Thank you very much. I'm going to say, as I often do in signing off, life is too short to read bad books, and you get to define what a bad book might be.
Exactly.
So you can quote that to Jonathan. Hey, thank you for spending time with me. We'll do this again soon, certainly in the first week in August. I've really enjoyed it. And I wish I could throw one of these your way so you could enjoy it too.
Thank you so much. It's a joy to talk with you. See you next time, and love to all.
Okay.